My name is Guy Paled, and I'm the architect of a product named Transposition Studio, which provides the ability to migrate applications from different environments and different languages to different languages and different environments. What I'm going to do in this screencast is I'm going to show you a bit the concepts of the Transposition Studio. I'm going to migrate an application from VB6 to .NET, and by doing so I'll walk you through the basic concepts of the Transposition Studio, and then we're going to do something more deep, and we're going to migrate a VB6 application to Java, and specifically it will be Java with GWT and Sencha, and at the back end we have also support for Spring Source, and that will actually take the application and break it into a client-server application, and it will be a more intensive transformation that the application will be undergoing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open this VB6 application I have here, and this is kind of like a standard application with a lot of the common challenges that you would see in a VB6 application. So you have your data access layer, you have queries and stuff like that, and you have your controls. You have here control arrays, and you have here a list view, image list, stuff that you have in a regular VB6 application, in a common VB6 application. And this is also a strictly client application, meaning that everything is running on the client machine. So I'll run the application, we'll see it a bit in action. We have here the customers list, and I can go ahead and update a specific item, and then you save, and you can see that it's updated, and it's basically your create, update, delete application. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the Transposition Studio and open a project I've created for migrating this application into .NET. And what will happen now is that the Transposition Studio is actually reading the code, generating what we call raw code, which is actually the same application but in the syntactic of .NET or any other language, and we are loading this code into an AST model, and above that we have a DOM, which actually provides us the semantic meaning of the application. So you see here we have the Solution Explorer, which actually lets us browse, navigate the original application. You can see we have here Win32 API and stuff like that, and you have your normal developer experience of navigating through the code. Now, the one thing that is very unique for the Transposition Studio is that you're not actually writing code or doing coding. What you're doing is you're defining rules. So for example, if I go here to the designer file, which is actually an extraction of the VB designer code, which is it's not in a human readable format, and the Transposition Studio already extracted that data into code that we can work in. So we have here actually the working area, and what we can do is we can take any properties. For example, I'll take this font here, and you can see, let's take the caption, and you can see that the caption is mapped to the target text property. You can see it in the quick info, and what we are doing now is we're looking at the properties or the rules that are defined for this specific property, and while I'm selecting this property in the code here, it doesn't mean that I'm doing changes specifically on this line of code. I'm actually doing changes for all the captions or all the usage of this property in the application. So we have the properties view, which is actually divided into two kinds of properties you can define. I would say mainly two properties, because we have the behavior, which is a bit of a more complex concept, and we will see that concept and the more advanced part when we will transpose the application to Java. But you can see that you have the refactoring area, which is kind of equivalent to what, you know, as the best practice in the market, meaning that you prepare your application for migration. So if you have something that is, you know, untyped, you can type it, and then, you know, you have a typed application instead of a late binded application, stuff like that. But basically you have your refactoring and you have your mapping, which actually defines how you are going to, you know, how is the target code going to be generated. And in this case, we're taking the caption property and we mapped it into the text property of the target environment. And as you can see, you can you know, map both the getter and the setters. For example, if you're mapping to Java, you won't have a property, you will have, you know, one setter method and one getter method, so you actually get the ability to do that here. So for example, if I'll take let's go here and let's say I take this property here and this field, excuse me, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, let's say I think it should be an object. So I'm actually changing the field type to an object. Okay, so while saving it, what happens is that I get a preview of what, you know, my change will do. And in this case, you can see here that this is a bad change to do because it introduces errors. And if I'll look at the errors here, you can see that, for example, we had here obj_rs.eof, which will not be recognized after this change. So this is a bad change to do. But if that change was good, I would go ahead and press apply, and that will apply the change. But that's for the sake of, you know, learning the tool. Press apply, and what will happen now is you see that this is now reflected, and we will have, you know, other instances. But another thing that you can see that in the error list, we now have an error, and that kind of like simulates a state that, let's say that field was object was an object field initially, and we can go here and do show task view, and what we'll have now is we see the error and we see the different instances that this error generates, meaning that you have one error. You have the field that is typed wrongly, and you have here the different places where this typing or the typing of the fields affect the code. The reason it's in the error list displayed as one error is that you only need one action in order to resolve all these errors. So I'll go here and do properties, and I will turn it back to what it was at the beginning, which was a record set. And now you can see that this action is a good action. We actually have, you know, 5 resolutions, meaning that we have stuff that is going to be fixed by doing this action. So applying the rule, and now we have again this as a record set, and everything works. So another thing that it's important to understand is that Transposition Studio is kind of like, you know, investigating the entire code, but it's investigating it within the environment. So what we see here in the object browser, we see all the environment dependencies of both the original application and the target application, and you can see here all the original APIs of VB6, and you can also see the new APIs that we are mapping to. In this case, we're mapping into Visual Web GUI, so you can see all the different APIs that Visual Web GUI supports. So let's take this application and let's transpose it. What we're doing now is we're going to do transpose an open solution. And what will happen now is that the Transposition Studio will apply all our rules, which, by the way, are disconnected from the original code, meaning that if you have code changes and stuff like that in the original application, given that the rules are still relevant for the original application, meaning you used a property named caption, but you already mapped that caption, it will apply also to new code updates, so you don't have to have code freezes. So we have here the migrated application, and I can build this application, and we will see that it builds out of the box based on the rules. And we can go here and look at the code that the tool generated us, and you can see that this is actually the same code, but in .NET and specifically in Visual Web GUI. And I'll run the application, and what you will see now is that Chrome is opening, and forgot to define the set a startup form. It's a web application now. And just about now. So I have the original application, the original VB application, running in HTML5 and specifically running in Visual Web GUI, which is an extension to ASP.NET. And you can see that, you know, all the things that used to work in the original application also works on the web browser. And let's go back to the Transposition Studio and do some more changes. We'll display another concept which is very powerful, which is actually mapping code. So let's go here and search text equals something like this. Okay, so I have this format here, and you know, it could be for functional reasons, and it could be for, you know, preference reasons. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this code fragment and I'm going to create a code mapping. Let's call it to string.empty, because that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this code here and I'm going to say, I don't care what is the property here, what is the object here, or the code here. It could be, you know, an invocation, could be anything, and I don't care what it is. And I only want to find, you know, this pattern in the code. So now I have the ability, and I prefer to write C#, and this should be equals. And now I have the ability to take this expression and to manipulate it as I see fit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say string.empty instead of the you know, previous quotation marks. So I can look, I can go do next, and what will happen now is I will see a preview of where this change is going to affect and how it's going to affect. So you can see that every place that we have text something.text equals an empty quotation marks, we have mapped it into this format here. So you can see all the places within the application that are going to change. So for example, here it's within an if. It doesn't matter because it's actually, you know, done using an AST model, and it's not textual based. You're actually defining, you know, patterns of trees. And at this specific place, you can see that, you know, every place that you have this pattern, it's changing to the new pattern. So I'm going to apply my changes, and you can see that the Transposition Studio has marked all the places where this pattern is going to affect. So another thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the OpenDB connection, something like that. Here, connect DB. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this code pattern here, which was, you know, which was a common standard or a common way to do initializing of connections in VB6. But now in .NET we have, you know, constructors, and we have parameters for constructors. So I can take these two lines and make it into a single line. So I'm going to map this code fragment, and I'm going to say map connection. I'm going to take the code, and what I'm going to say is I don't care what this is, and I don't care what this is. Could be, you know, any variable. And this is actually the pattern that I want to select. The only thing I need to do also here is select this, because this is the connection string, and you have here some kind of logic of generating this connection string, and I really don't care about it. What I care about is taking these two lines and making it to a single line. So this is my pattern. So again, I'll take write in C#, and basically what I want to do is put in this pattern, and you can see that what I'm doing is I'm taking the first parameter and putting it here, and I'm taking the connection string and passing it as a parameter for this static create method. So I'm going to do this, and this is actually the template that I want to have. So again, Transposition Studio generates a preview of the change, and I can, you know, validate that the change is what I wanted to achieve, and you can see that it's exactly what I wanted to achieve. Two lines were mapped into a single line, and I'm going to apply this change, and you can see again that what happens is that I have this marking indicating that there is a pattern here, and the quick info shows me the pattern. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to transpose this file. I'm only transposing this file because I want to see, you know, the changes in the code, and that kind of like reflects on another concept that we have, which is working iteratively. So I'm going to search.create, and you can see that my pattern was applied here. Okay, you can see that we have here the static create method, and you can see that the logic of creating the connection string was preserved, and it was also, you know, migrated into current best practices, meaning that instead of string concatenation you have formatting, and it's more readable. And we can also search for the second pattern that I've defined. Here it is, and you can see that every place that we had .text equals empty quotation mark, we have now the string.empty. So the next thing I'm going to do, and this is going to be a bigger jump, because when we're looking on Visual WebGUI and on migrating an application of VB6 application to Visual WebGUI, Visual WebGUI actually provides us some kind of a easy fall, if you would like, not to you know, to underestimate the challenge of migrating an application to from VB to .NET, and specifically to to a web server. But we have a single layer application which is running on the server. Now, in the case of migrating to Java, this is a different scenario totally. So let's open a different solution. This time I would open the crew to Sencha solution, which is, this is not done need, which is the same application, but now we're taking that application into Java, and I'm going to show you a bit the differences in this application. First of all, if we go here to the object browser, you can see that now we have two kinds of dependencies, of environment dependencies. We have the original VB6 API that we had in the original application, in the previous application or previous migration, but now we have also the Java runtime API, and we have here GWT API and stuff like that, and we also have the Sencha API. So this application is actually mapped into Java already. So for example, I can go into the designer file, and I can see here, for example, if I take a text box, it's mapped to Sencha text field class. But this is more of the same that we've seen in the previous migration. But the more important part is that we are going to take this application and migrate into a client server application, and we can see these different behaviors by going into the solution properties, and I can go into behaviors, and this is, you know, this is a bit, a more complex behavior, because we're actually breaking the application apart. So if we look at a few behaviors are kind of like your stuff that you can add to your transposition project, and they change the way you migrate the application, add a bit UI and stuff like that, so you'd be able to define those behaviors. But specifically, I want to focus you on 3 behaviors. One is GWT client-server behavior, meaning that we are going to break this application into layers. One layer will be on the server, and we're going to create a servlet, and the other layer is going to be the client application, which is going to be using GWT and Sencha. Another behavior that's worth noticing here is that we have GWT resources behavior, because while the resources, migrating to .NET was different in terms of the difference from how GWT does resource handling. It's completely different. So we have this behavior here, and another behavior that I want to point you and to focus you on is the Spring source Spring dependency injection behavior, which actually allows us to take the application and make it a more enterprise-like application, and change behaviors that you had in VB6 that we have better concepts of doing them today. And specifically, we're going to focus on dependency injection. The only thing you have to define in the Spring Source dependency injection behavior is where do you want your beans XML file, which actually defines the mappings for the dependency injection. So let's first look at how do we define client-server behavior. When we added this behavior into our solution, we actually enhanced the UI to support different features of actually defining how we're going to do the client-server splitting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the object model of the solution, and we've done a few things here. First, if I take this, I want to turn back a bit and show you a few concepts in the original application that then will be more clear why we're doing stuff in the Transposition Studio. So we have this VB6 application, and if I go into the code here, you can see that we have this here. Okay, this is a field, and it actually defines the class that is responsible for interacting with the database. And in VB, because you had a lot of for example, you had the ability to change code while you're debugging, it wasn't so important, or it wasn't a custom to actually do dependency injection, because I could run the application and change this class in runtime and to work. So you can see here that this application has 2 kinds of manager. One is Dev Data Manager, which actually was developed for developers doing work on the application and seeing the entire database and etc. And you have your Production Data Manager, which was this is how they deployed the application. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to take these 2 classes and define them as a service. We want to send them to the server, being a servlet that we can use and query, and even at later point interact with without the client application. That's the first change we want to do. The second change we want to do is we want to take this here and extract an interface and work with an interface instead of working with the actual class. So let's see that in the how we did that in the Transposition Studio. So the first thing we've done is let's go into the Solution Explorer and see this field here. The first thing that we've done is we have extracted an interface, and I can show you the interface here. The way you extract interface is pretty simple. You go and do refactoring and say extract interfaces and select your members that you want to extract, and then you define the name. And what we actually done is we have extracted an interface from Dev Data Manager and from Production Data Manager. And what we actually did is we extracted the interface of Dev Data Manager and then implemented that interface in the Production Data Manager. So you can see that if I look at the base types of these classes, both of them now implement the Data Manager interface. So as you can see here, what happens now is that I have here a field which is actually doing an instantiation of an interface, which obviously that will not work, but that's exactly where the dependency injections comes into play. So from the perspective of the dependency injection, we will actually take these classes and define them in the Spring layer, and this will be generated by the Spring framework. Another thing that is worth noticing is that we wanted these classes to work on the server. So if I do properties on the Production Data Manager, and it's the same on the Development Data Manager, we have now this here added. This is only because we selected the Spring dependency injection behavior, that the client server behavior, that we have this the ability to use this behavior. And what this behavior actually wants us to define is what is the role of this class in the target application. So by default, all the classes are the role are client. And in this case, and also in the case of the data manager, we have defined the role to be the server. And another thing that it's worth noticing is that in the case of the interface, we define the role to be a service contract, meaning this is going to be our servlet. Okay. We have other definitions. For example, the customer object is a data contract object, but I'll leave it here. So let's now transpose the application and open the solution, and this time Eclipse is going to open and not Visual Studio, and we're going to see the application in Java. Actually, what happened now is all my rules and behaviors were applied, and now I get the target application. From our perspective, this is an iterative process. You do changes, you see the target code, and you define, you update based on the target code. The only thing I'm going to do now is, because GWT takes a long time to load, I'm going to run the application. Let's do run in background for now. No, it looks like it's going to end. Okay, and because it also takes a lot of time to initialize GWT, the JD engine and the dev mode engine, I'm going to also run it. So let's now look at the generated application. The first thing that it's worth noticing is that we have a completely different structure. We have the source main Java directory, and we have packages, and specifically you should notice that we have a server package, and we have the client package, and we also have the GWT module package that is actually importing this directory here. And you have your WAR directory, which is part of creating a web application in Java, and you have your POM file, which is part of the Maven framework, which you can see that you have here different dependencies that we included in Maven. You have your GWT extensions and stuff like that. So this is actually, it's generated as a standard Java solution, or you would say workspace, not a workspace, but a project. So let's take a look at the code here, and you can see that the Java handlers are now the Java handle formats were transposed. And if we look at, let's say, load customers, I think at this method here, we can see another very drastic change that this application overwent, and it's that we have taken an application which was completely synchronous, and we have transposed it into an asynchronous application. And specifically here, you can see that we're going to this interface, and now we have created already the data manager async interface based on the data manager interface, and we have transposed the code to be asynchronously. So when you're doing a get customers list, what actually happens is that you interact with the backend servlet, and when you get the result, you continue your original code. So this is something worth noticing. And the rest of the code is standard GWT Sencha code. And let's see the server part of the application. So we have here at the server side, we have here the dev data manager, we have here the prod data manager, and we also have a new class here which is actually based on our interface that we extracted and defined as a service contract. And what happened is that we generated a servlet for you, and the servlet actually accesses the original class and operates it. But one thing that is very important to notice is that instead of now having a new dev data manager or prod data manager class, we have here integration into Spring Source, which was the behavior that we defined in the transposition solution. And what we have here is that we want the data manager bean. And you can see that we have generated here the beans XML, and by default we have here data manager, and the class is this class and this package. But now we can change this while running, and we have a different behavior. You can see here that we have also generated this class, and what this class does, it generates the Spring Source application context based on the beans XML file. And you can see that what we have here in the get bean and the static get bean method is that we are actually getting the specific bean based on the bean ID. Another thing that I wanted to point you into is the resources, which we talked about, the change, the behavior of migrating into the GWT style of handling resources. And the way you do resources in GWT is that you have an interface which extends client bundle, and you have an annotation which refers you to the specific image. And you can see alongside the class we have extracted the different resources. We even extracted the image list resources here, and they are all part of this interface here. So if I take, for example, let's say this, the close image, I'm going to do references project, and I'm going to go to the first reference. As you can see, here we had in the original application getting the picture from the regex file, the .NET regex file. And what we have here is the way of doing resource handling in GWT. So these are the three things I wanted to show you. The client-server behavior, which, by the way, when we were transposing into GWT was a necessity, because GWT actually takes the client-side code and compiles it into JavaScript. So if we will look at the runtime that was generated, this is the Sencha controls. This application here that was generated actually runs in JavaScript in the client. So when we are doing stuff, when we're doing actions, let's say I'm going to edit this record or something like that, this is actually happening on the client, and we're going to the server to do the actual work. I think basically that covers the migration to Java part, and I would like to emphasize that the current migration to Java was based on 3 weeks of POCing Java. So I think it reflects on from my perspective, it reflects on the capability of the tool, or the flexibility of the tool to migrate to different environments. So that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.